Welcome back. As the country continues to follow closely the Madlanga Commission of Inquiry and the ad hoc parliamentary committee probing corruption and malfeasance within the SAPS, the Auditor-General says a bill amounting to billions in irregular expenditure is also of concern. For a discussion on this, I am now joined by Lisa-Maré Schickerling, who is a member of the Portfolio Committee on Police. A very good evening to you, Lisa. Thank you so much for your time this evening. Now, a further highlight into what is the apparent inefficiencies of our law enforcement in this Auditor-General report once again. And I want us to start with that big number of 3.2 billion rand in irregular expenditure. If you could please unpack that for us.
Good evening to you, Masa, and to all the viewers out there. Yeah, 3.2 million rand. It's almost an amount of money that your brain can't comprehend. It's a massive amount of money. I think what we need to keep in mind is this is not just about overspending. It's money where proper legal procurement processes were completely ignored and bypassed. It means that tenders were awarded without required oversight, checks, or compliance. And in many cases, as we were told, the suppliers didn't even meet the minimum requirements, which is absolutely shocking. What this tells us that the SAPS's internal financial controls are weak, and in some cases, they were deliberately ignored.
You know, as you're speaking about the suppliers that didn't even meet some of the minimum requirements as well, I'd like us to even speak further about that. But before we do, on another big number as well that's come out of that AG report, just under 2.5 billion rand of that was also coming from previous years, and that figure, I believe, was investigated and then never referred for any action. Now, I presume the next step would be to investigate again the currently stacked up irregular expenditure from this financial year. Won't that just end up like the previous irregular expenditure that was merely investigated but not actioned?
So this is exactly the concern that we had. You know, the AG shows that cases are being investigated internally, but then they simply stall and are forgotten about or put into file 13. There's no disciplinary action, no consequences, no referrals to the SAPS's anti-corruption unit or the Hawks. So the pattern really is just let's investigate, file, and forget about it. And unless there is political will and leadership to enforce consequence management, there's just going to be a cycle that's repeated year after year, as we've seen. We need these cases moved from internal audit shelves to actual disciplinary boards, criminal dockets, and courtrooms, because they're just sitting there waiting. And without these consequences, irregular expenditure is just going to keep on growing. We've seen that happen time after time because the system isn't teaching officials what will happen if they actually do take steps against them. We're just saying it's okay, carry on. There's no actual consequence management in this whole process.
You know, and speaking of consequence management as well, and some of the solutions that you've just touched on here, can we say that the SAPS is taking this seriously enough if it's left its internal audit leadership post vacant for 2 years now? Now, if you don't have leadership in the very department and aspect where you're failing dismally when it comes to irregular expenditure, surely that should be where you prioritize filling those vacancies.
Obviously, I mean, it's quite shocking to find out that it's such an important post is left vacant for 2 years. It's completely unacceptable. And we cannot take the SAPS seriously that they want to make sure that they curb corruption, because the internal audit is the watchdog of financial integrity inside of the SAPS. So technically, they do not have an internal watchdog. And leaving this post vacant for 2 years just signals that financial oversight is simply not a priority at this stage. It also means that there's no senior authority to challenge irregular procurement. No one signs off compliance processes. There's no internal champion for accountability. And this gap didn't happen overnight, as we've seen. It reflects a culture that is comfortably operating without oversight, and it's just a system that keeps getting perpetuated year after year.
Speaking of pattern, a culture as well, these are things that are obviously deep-rooted and very difficult to change as well. So what is it going to take to root out this kind of culture and precedent that's been set now?
Well, you know, I think that they have to give us clear deadlines on the implementation of the AG's recommendations. We want to see real disciplinary action. We don't just want to see commissions come and take place and reports being written and then shelved. We want to make sure that people that are involved in wrongdoing are identified, that there's transparency in the reporting progress back to Parliament, and we don't want vague updates. We want proper updates. We want clear dates. We want names. We want tracking. We want public updates so the community and the people out there in South Africa that are affected by crime on a daily basis actually know that we're holding the SAPS accountable. We can't hold normal South Africans accountable for corruption, but we don't hold our own SAPS police service that should be watching over this irregular expenditure accountable. And we're definitely pushing for Treasury and the SIU to be more involved where necessary, because this cannot obviously be handled internal anymore.
Now, as you've mentioned, as a parliamentary committee, you've demanded firm timelines. You are asking for implementation to happen and of the Auditor-General reports and recommendations too, and also full accountability and consequences, all sorts of great things when it comes to consequence management. But even the AG said after each audit cycle, actions are put into place, there's plans that are put into place, but the problem is they never actually implemented. And in fact, the problem is only getting worse with this escalating irregular expenditure. So what if your demands as a parliamentary committee aren't actually met? What will then be the case?
Well, it's something we discussed with the AG, but we're definitely going to recommend that the SIU, that some of the referrals of specific tenders are done to the SIU, because that's important and it's something we discussed and agreed on. We will most certainly summon senior SAP leadership to appear and account publicly in front of the committee again. We are going to definitely recommend disciplinary action against the accounting officers, and if necessary, we will escalate to the minister. And we will call for the suspension of these members if necessary. We also can request the AG and Treasury to impose material irregularity consequences, which include financial recovery and legal action plans. And remember, Parliament's oversight powers are not just symbolic, they're enforceable. And we're going to make sure that we use our force and our voices to enforce them.
Mm-hmm. Another damning thing that came out of the AG reports is when we're talking about, the suppliers not meeting requirements for those contracts as well. And it shows that the SAPS has persistently been non-compliant when it comes to supply chain management of laws and regulations. Now, Lisa, these are supposed to be the law enforcers. How are they getting the law wrong, consistently so, particularly when it comes to supply chain?
It was quite eye-opening to me. I don't know if I want to say it was scary, but when we specifically spoke about the tenders, and I asked about the bid adjudication committee, I was told that one of the reasons why they get this so wrong is because they're not trained properly. So, I mean, that didn't make sense to me at all. How do we put people in charge of a bid adjudication committee that must approve millions of rands, but we haven't trained them? That it makes sense to me why we're sitting with the problems that we do. But SAPS is supposed to enforce the law daily, yet inside its own system, basic legal procurement rules are ignored. It's ridiculous. And it's not a training problem alone. It's a culture problem. People know the rules. They know what they're supposed to be doing. They're choosing not to follow them. And they make those choices because historically, there have been no consequences for non-compliance. And the people that are entrusted to uphold the law are not the ones that are actually breaking the law. This just erodes public trust further and damages the credibility of the policing system as a whole in our country.
And speaking about that erosion of public trust as well, you've been quite categoric about the powers that Parliament does have, them not just being symbolic. For an ordinary South African who's seen this time and time again, how are they to be assured that this indeed won't happen again and there will be a difference this time around? What is going to make it so different now?
Well, I think the fact that we're so invested in making sure that that we try and clean up the police, especially in the senior management. The problem is massive problem with the senior management of the police. And please don't get me wrong, we have incredible police officers that serve in the police services across the board. We really have brilliant police officers that want to do the right thing. The problem is that handful of people that are perpetuating the system. So, you know, from our side, we are not going to stop asking questions. If it means that we have to call the members in front of the committee on a weekly basis, we will do that. And we are going to make sure that we hold them accountable for what the AG has said. And we're going to make sure that they implement the recommendations of the AG. The weak controls and this procurement manipulation that is going on has to stop, because by stealing and misappropriating these funds and awarding tenders irregularly, it just means that there's less and less money for the police officers on the ground that desperately need resources. They need vehicles, they need chairs, there's so much that they need, basic things, they need uniform. And by misappropriating these funds, they are not able to get the necessary resources they need. And this in turn affects the people on the ground. And to make sure that we look after South African safety, we will make sure that we use our voice to ask questions over and over again until they start getting it right. And we see people being arrested for the crimes that they are committing.
And you know, to echo your point as well, not to paint all officers with the same brush as well, it would be amiss also not to also just accept and see, just coming out of the commission, the massive problem when it comes to senior management within the SAPS. And doesn't this all just underpin what we have been hearing from coming out of the Madlanga Commission as well as the ad hoc committee into our SAPS?
Oh, yes, no, absolutely. You know, the pattern is just the same. You see it over and over again. There's weak internal controls, procurement manipulation, as I said earlier on, a culture of impunity, a senior leadership who seem unwilling, unable to enforce accountability. And it's time that those police officers stand up and start taking charge of the police services and doing what they're supposed to be doing. The commissions are definitely just confirming what the AG has reported year after year. The problems in the SAPS are systemic. They're not isolated at all. Financial mismanagement and governance failures are directly linked to operational failures. That is as clear as day. And this is why crime is not being effectively fought in our country at the moment. We cannot fix policing on the streets if the top management of the SAPS is unwilling and is currently broken.
Lisa, thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.